The silent Intrenchati private jet touched down under a sky that looked heavy, as if the clouds themselves carried secrets. Sundar Pichai sat by the window, his face calm, his mind storming. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, handwritten, sealed in thick paper, bearing the emblem of a secretive club of billionaires who believed they shaped the world. They called themselves the Circle. No one said no to them. Yet Sundar hadn't come to obey. He had come to test them, to test himself, and to face the weight of something deeper that no one in that room would expect. When the car door opened and he stepped onto the marble steps of the sprawling mansion, cameras clicked. Men in $1,000 suits whispered. Some smirked. To them, Sundar was an outsider, a boy from a small Indian town who had somehow stumbled into their league. They measured worth by inheritance, yachts, and arrogance. Sundar carried none of those, only a quiet presence. That unsettled them in ways they couldn't explain. Inside, the great hall was lit with golden chandeliers. The air smelled of expensive cigars, aged whiskey, and the arrogance of men who thought they were untouchable. Sundar walked in silently. He wasn't dressed like them. His suit was simple, his shoes scuffed from travel. And that was a first. Moment they underestimated him. Mr. Pichai, one voice called out, laced with mockery. It was Lawrence Hamilton, heir to a steel empire. Finally, the man of silicon arrives. Laughter rippled. Sundar gave no reaction. He scanned the room faces that ran oil, banks, weapons, technology. He noticed the pride in their eyes, but also something else, Hunir. Beneath their mocking smiles was the constant worry that their thrones could be shaken. They gathered around. A long table carved from black oak. One by one, they spoke of power, wealth, and control. Sundar listened, but his mind was far away. He thought of his mother's voice back in India, reminding him, never forget where you came from. He thought of the young workers coding late nights in cubicles who would never sit in such rooms, yet carried the weight of the future on their shoulders. When it was his turn to speak, silence fell. Every eye turned toward him. Sundar stood, his voice soft but steady. You believe money builds the future, he began, pausing to let the words sink. But I have seen children with no shoes build ideas that change the world. The laughter stopped. The room tensed. No one expected defiance. He continued, I did not come here to flatter you. I came to remind you that power is not in what you own, but in what you give. And tonight, I will show you something that will shake the way you think forever. Whispers rose. Some scoffed. Some leaned forward. But one man, a shadow in the corner, watched Sundar with piercing eyes. Sundar felt the weight of his gaze. He knew this night would not end with speeches. It would end with a test, one that could destroy reputations, alliances, and even his own standing outside. Thunder cracked across the sky as if the world itself had heard his challenge. And then, the door of the mansion slammed open. A figure walked in, drenched from the rain, carrying a folder that seemed far too dangerous to be here. The circle turned in shock. Sundar froze. Inside that folder was something that could ruin not only the billionaires around the table, but Sundar himself. The folder of shadows. Room fell into silence. The kind that pressed down on every chest and made even the chandeliers above seem to stop swaying. The stranger who had entered was no servant, no late guest, but a storm in human form. His coat clung to him, dripping rainwater onto the pristine marble floor, leaving behind small dark stains that looked almost like wounds across the white stone. In his hand he held a thick folder, bound not in leather or silk, like the papers usually passed in billionaire circles, but in something cheap, frayed at the edges, and dangerous in its simplicity. It was the kind of folder that did not need gold to carry weight. The circle of billionaires shifted in their seats. Some sneered, ready to dismiss him. Others tensed with a recognition they dared not voice. Sundar's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his entire being was alert. He knew moments like this changed everything, not in loud bursts of chaos, but in the quiet unveiling of truths too sharp to ignore. The man stopped at the head of the table. His presence, though dripping wet, was larger than the suits and titles around him. He dropped the folder onto the oak table with a sound that echoed through the grand hall like a gunshot. "You all stay here," the man said, his voice steady, but edged with something raw, believing you control the world. "But this folder holds proof that the world is slipping out of your hands." Gasps rippled through the room. One of the billionaires, an oil magnate with silver hair and a perpetual sneer, leaned forward. "Who are you to burst in here and speak? Of control? This is private. You have no place here." But the man ignored him. Instead, his gaze landed on Sundar. It was not random. It was heavy, deliberate, as if he had crossed storms and shadows only to find him. "You know what this is?" He said softly. Sundar remained silent. But inside, old memories stirred memories of a document he once refused to sign. A project he once shut down. A betrayal he had chosen to bury. The room demanded answers. "Open it," another billionaire barked. His fists clenched against the table. The man flipped the folder open, spreading its contents across the polished surface. Photographs, letters, and financial records spilled out. The billionaires leaned, in their arrogance cracking as they recognized names, companies, hidden deals. Each page was a mirror of their sins, bribes, cover-ups, exploitation. Their smiles faded, their eyes darkened, and then came the final paper. A thin sheet that carried Sundar's name at the top. The room turned toward him. Suspicion bloomed. Instantly, ugly and sharp. Lawrence Hamilton smirked, his voice dripping with venom. "So the boy from India is not as pure as he pretends. Looks like you've got dirt on your hands too, Sundar." Sundar rose slowly, his hands resting on the table, steady as stone. His voice carried no anger, only a calm strength. "You mistake presence for guilt. What you see there is not my corruption, it is my refusal." He lifted the paper, holding it up for all to see. "Years ago, I was offered to join in deals that exploited the poor, that crushed those with no voice. I walked away. I let them call me weak. I let them mock me. But I will never sign something that destroys lives. That is the difference between me and you." The room was split. Some sneered, unwilling to accept, while others were silent, troubled by the conviction in his voice. The stranger stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Sundar. "You refused once, but tonight they will try to make you accept, and if you don't, they will break you." Thunder boomed outside again, rattling the glass windows as if the storm itself was eavesdropping. The air grew heavy with a fear. No one wanted to name the circle of billionaires. Men who laughed at governments and mocked presidents suddenly seemed smaller. For the first time, they realized this night was no longer about power or even money. It was about survival. And as the stranger's hand hovered over the folder again, he whispered words that froze Sundar to the core. Because hidden in these pages is not just their truth. It is yours, something you thought was buried forever. Asterisk. The buried truth, rain outside, grew heavier, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers demanding to be heard. The chandelier swayed slightly as though the mansion itself felt the unease inside. The folder lay open on the table, its contents scattered like pieces of a broken mirror, reflecting both the sins of the powerful and the shadows of the past. Sundar stood still, his hand frozen over the paper with his name on it. His calm face betrayed little, but inside, he felt the stir of something he had buried long ago, something he had hoped would never surface in front of men like these. The stranger's voice carried across the hall again, low but sharp enough to slice through the tension. "Years ago, before you became the man they all see today, you made a choice. A choice that saved lives, but cost you more than anyone here could ever understand." The billionaires leaned forward. They weren't listening out of respect. They were sniffing for weakness, desperate to seize anything that could turn Sundar into prey. Lawrence Hamilton smirked, his eyes glittering with cruelty. What could possibly be buried in that folder? A scandal? A betrayal? Tell us, Sundar, what skeleton hides in your closet? Sundar finally lowered the paper, placing it gently back on the table. His voice, though soft, carried across the hall with a weight none of them expected. You all measure worth by how much you can own, how much you can keep for yourselves. But there was a time in my life when I learned the real measure of a man is what he is willing to lose for others. The words unsettled some, though most tried to laugh it off. Still, his calmness had a way of silencing, even mockery. The stranger leaned in closer, his wet coat dripping onto the polished floor. Should I tell them, or will you? He asked, his tone neither cruel nor kind, but insistent, almost like a test. Sundar's eyes met his. The weight of that gaze was unbearable, not because of fear, but because it forced him to remember. He saw flashes in his mind, an office years ago, a heated argument, a contract placed before him, a pen pressed into his hand. He saw faces, tired and hungry, workers whose fates depended on a choice he would make. And he saw himself walking away, empty-handed, while those who had trusted him cried tears of relief. Taking a breath, Sundar turned back to the room. Long before I became CEO, I was approached with a project, a deal that promised billions in profit. But hidden in the fine print was destruction factories that would poison rivers, displace families, and silence voices too poor to fight back. I was told to sign. I refused. They threatened to end my career before it began. I told them I would rather sweep streets with honor than build empires on broken lives. His words hung in the air like smoke. The room was divided. Some billionaires scoffed, others shifted uncomfortably, as if reminded of their own buried choices. But the stranger did not stop there. He placed another paper from the folder onto the table. This one was different. It bore no company logos, no financial numbers. It was a letter, handwritten, stained with age. Sundar's face changed the moment he saw it. His calm broke, just for a flicker, and that flicker was enough to ignite the curiosity of everyone watching. This, the stranger said softly, is the part of the story you never told, the part you hoped would remain hidden forever. Lawrence leaned forward, his grin widening. Ah, so the saint has secrets after all. The letter was pushed across the table toward Sundar. The paper trembled slightly as if carrying a life of its own. Sundar hesitated before picking it up. The ink was faded, the handwriting familiar in a way that stabbed his heart. It was his father's. The words blurred before his eyes, but he could still hear them. As if his father was standing in the room whispering in his ear, My son, if you ever find yourself in a room where power demands you to bow, remember this, your strength is not in what you build, but in what you refuse to destroy. If that choice costs you everything, know that it will never cost you your soul. The room was silent. Sundar closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from the words, but also feeling the ache of memories long gone. When he looked up, his voice was steady again, though deeper, heavier. You wanted my secret. Here it is. I did not build my life on power. I built it on a promise my father made me keep. And tonight, I will not break it. The stranger studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod, as if he had been waiting for this very declaration, but not everyone was moved. Lawrence slammed his fist on the table, his voice sharp with anger. Enough of this sentimental nonsense. This is weakness, not strength. The world is not built on promises, it is built on control. And if you will not play by those rules, Sundar, then you do not belong here. Others joined him, their voices rising in anger. The room shifted from tension to chaos, a storm of voices clashing, accusations flying. But Sundar did not flinch. He stood tall, his father's words still echoing in his mind. And then, amidst the noise, the stranger spoke again, louder this time, silencing the room with a single sentence. You all think Sundar is your enemy tonight. But the truth is, there is someone in this room who has already betrayed every single one of you. The billionaires froze. Their anger turned to suspicion, their eyes darting around the table. Searching for the traitor among them, Dot and Sundar realized, with a sinking feeling, that the real battle was only beginning. Asterisk the betrayal inside that mansion seemed to shrink as the words hung in the air. Someone in this room has already betrayed you. The stranger's voice was not loud, but it carried the kind of weight that crushed laughter, silenced arrogance, and froze every pair of eyes at the table. The billionaires, Men who could stare down presidents without blinking now shifted uneasily like schoolboys caught in a lie. Suspicion spread across the long oak table like fire jumping from page to page. The storm outside raged harder, wind howling through the cracks in the windows, as if the night itself demanded the truth. Sundar felt the change immediately. The circle of billionaires who had moments ago laughed and mocked him now turned on each other, their alliances cracking under the pressure of doubt. Lawrence Hamilton was the first to break the silence. His booming voice carried a false confidence that barely covered his own fear. This is a trick, a cheap attempt to divide us. No one here has betrayed anyone. But even as he said it, his eyes darted to the banker seated across from him. A man known for quiet deals behind closed doors, the oil magnate. His silver hair gleaming under the chandelier, leaned forward. You speak too quickly, Lawrence. Perhaps you protest because you are the one with something to hide. The tension thickened. Chairs creaked as men shifted uneasily. Sundar remained still, his expression unreadable. He had no need to add to. Their chaos, their fear was unraveling them faster than any speech could. But deep inside he wondered, why had the stranger brought him here? Why expose these truths in his presence? Was he merely a witness, or was he a part of the test itself? The stranger, still dripping rain onto the marble, opened the folder once more. He drew out another set of papers, thinner than the first, but sharper in their danger. He spread them slowly across the table. These, he said, are not about Sundar. These are about one of you. The billionaires leaned in despite themselves, their greed for information stronger than their caution. The documents revealed secret transfers of money billions, siphoned quietly from the very fortunes these men trusted. The accounts led offshore, hidden under false names. But the pattern was clear. Someone had been bleeding the circle from within. Gasps filled the air, followed by growls of anger. Fingers pointed, voices rose, accusations flew. One billionaire shouted at another, swearing he had seen him in Zurich last spring. Another swore that only the banker could move such sums unseen. Chaos swallowed the room. Sundar watched them, his mind turning. He felt no triumph in their downfall, only a deep sadness. These were men who believed themselves rulers of the world, yet they were as fragile as anyone else, undone not by outside forces, but by their own greed. Lawrence suddenly stood, flaming, his fist against the table so hard that glasses rattled. Enough! We cannot allow some soaked intruder to tear us apart. This, he jabbed a finger toward the stranger, is nothing more than manipulation. Then his gaze snapped toward Sundar, sharp and accusing. And you knew about this, didn't you? Sundar's calm gaze met his. I knew one thing, that truth always finds a way. Whether you welcome it or not, it does not stay buried forever. The words landed heavily. Some shifted away from Lawrence. Others stared at him with narrowed eyes. Doubt had found its mark. The stranger, for the first time, allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. You all built empires believing betrayal only comes from outside, but it is always closest. Always the hand you trust most. And tonight one of you will be unmasked. The storm roared louder, lightning flashing against the glass, illuminating the strained faces around the table. Each man looked at the other, searching for cracks, terrified his own might be revealed. Then, in the silence, the stranger placed a final envelope on the table. He slid it forward slowly until it stopped directly in front of Sundar. Every eye turned. Every breath seemed to stop. The stranger's voice dropped to a whisper, but it was the kind of whisper that could shake walls. Inside this envelope is the name of the betrayer. But Sundar, you will be the one to reveal it. Because only you can decide what happens next. Sundar's hand hovered over the envelope. He could feel the heat of the billionaire's stares, the weight of their fear pressing down on him. He thought of his father's words, of promises made long ago, of the workers and families who would never sit at such a table but would feel the ripple of every decision made here. Fingers touched the envelope. The paper was thin, fragile, yet heavier than stone, and as he slowly lifted it, the room held its breath, balanced on the edge of revelation. But just as Sundar began to tear it open, the lights flickered and the mansion was plunged into complete darkness. The darkness between the blackout was sudden, absolute, swallowing the grand hall in an ocean of black. The chandeliers above, moments ago glittering with arrogant brilliance, now hung like dead ornaments in the dark. For a few seconds, no one moved. The silence was thick, broken only by the steady roar of the storm outside, and the occasional hiss of rain forcing itself through the cracks of the old windows. Then came the first sound, a chair scraping violently against the floor. A voice barked, sharp and panicked. Who turned off the lights? Another shouted, this is a setup. Fear disguised itself as rage, spilling into the dark room. Sundar stood still, his fingers still clutching the envelope. In the silence of his mind, he felt the weight of the moment. Darkness had stripped these men of their confidence. Without the shield of light and the illusions of power, they were vulnerable, raw, exposed. Then chaos broke. Glasses shattered. Footsteps thudded across the marble. Someone shoved past Sundar, nearly knocking the envelope from his grip. Hands clawed for papers on the table, desperate to seize or destroy evidence before it could be revealed. Amid the noise, Sundar heard something else. A whisper, close to his ear. Too close. Don't open it, Sundar. If you do, you'll bring ruin on more than just them. You'll destroy yourself. The voice vanished into the dark before he could turn. His chest tightened. Was it a warning or a threat? The stranger's voice rose. Above the chaos, calm, unwavering, like a lighthouse piercing fog. Fear is the loudest in the dark. But truth is not afraid of shadows. A flash of lightning lit the room for an instant, casting grotesque shapes of fear across every face. Sundar caught glimpses, Lawrence clutching the table, his eyes wild. The banker stuffing papers into his coat. The oil magnate whispering too. Another man, their heads bent too close, and in the corner the stranger, still as stone, his eyes fixed only on Sundar. The light died again, plunging them back into blackness. Sundar's mind raced. He could open the envelope now, unseen, reveal the betrayer in secret, and hold power over them all. Or he could wait, risk the envelope being torn away, risk losing the one truth that could shatter the circle's arrogance forever. But then came a sound that cut through everything. A scream, sharp, guttural, and real. It wasn't the sound of fear, it was the sound of pain. The chaos rose. Whispers filled the dark. Who was that? Where did it come from? When the lights flickered back to life, the scene before them was different. One of the billionaires, the banker, was slumped across the table, his face pale, his hand clutching his chest. A glass lay shattered beside him, the liquid seeping into the papers like blood across snow. Gasps filled the room. Some shouted for help. Others stepped back in suspicion. Lawrence pointed a trembling finger. Poison. Someone poisoned him. The accusation tore through the group like a blade. Panic spread again, louder now, more desperate. Each man looked at the other, not as an ally, but as an executioner. Sundar looked at the fallen man, then at the envelope in his hand. The betrayal wasn't just about money anymore. The circle was crumbling from within, tearing itself apart, and he stood in the center of its collapse. The stranger moved closer, his voice low enough for only Sundar to hear. This is what happens when truth is buried too long. Rot spreads. Fear poisons, and then destroy each other before the enemy even arrives. Sundar's hand tightened around the envelope. His father's words echoed in his mind again. Your strength is not in what you build, but in what you refuse to destroy. He rose slowly, his voice steady but sharp enough to command the storm of chaos. Enough. The room froze. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, listening. You sit here, trembling in the dark, not because of me, not because of the stranger, but because of yourselves. You built your thrones on greed, on secrets, and now those same secrets are tearing you apart. You think betrayal is hiding in this envelope? Betrayal has been sitting in each of you from the start. His words cut through them, leaving them speechless, their pride shattered. But as Sundar raised the envelope higher, preparing at last to reveal its contents, The stranger's hand shot out and stopped him. Their eyes locked, the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths between them. If you open it now, the stranger said softly, the truth will destroy more than them. It will destroy something you love. The envelope trembled in Sundar's hand. For the first time that night, doubt pierced his resolve. And in that moment, as every eye in the room watched him, the storm outside shattered the sky with thunder so violent it felt like the mansion itself would crack. The choice lay before him. Reveal the name and unleash devastation, or keep it sealed and bear the burden of silence. And just as his lips parted to speak, the mansion doors burst open again. A familiar figure stepped inside, someone Sundar never expected to see here, someone whose presence would change everything. Asterisk, the last revelation. Storm swallowed the night in fury. But inside the mansion, it was silence that shook the room. Every head turned toward the massive doors as they groaned open, spilling a rush of cold rain-scented air into the golden hall. Standing in the doorway, framed by lightning, was a figure that froze Sundar's breath in his chest. It was his mother. Draped in a simple sari. Soaked from the storm, her presence cut sharper than all the suits and diamonds in the room. She looked small against the towering doors, yet every billionaire felt her presence as though a mountain had walked into their circle. Her face, lined with years of struggle and quiet strength, carried none of the arrogance that filled this hall, and that was exactly why it unsettled them. Sundar whispered, his voice breaking in a way that none of these men had ever heard before. The billionaires stared, confused and annoyed. Lawrence Hamilton sneered. What is this? A peasant woman? What circus have you brought into our house, Sundar? But Sundar ignored him. His mother walked forward slowly, her wet footsteps echoing in the grand hall. She reached him, her eyes never leaving his, and without a word she touched the envelope in his trembling hand. My son, she said softly, her voice carrying more power than thunder. You hold their sins in your hand, but do not forget when you reveal the darkness of others, you must also face your own light. Do not let them drag you into their shadows. Her words pierced him deeper than the stranger's tests, deeper than the billionaire's mockery. In that moment, Sundar understood. The stranger had not brought him here to destroy these men. He had brought him here to choose what kind of man he would become in the face of their corruption. The stranger stepped forward now, his expression unreadable. The envelope contains the betrayer's name. Reveal it, and you will watch this circle tear itself apart in fire and ruin. Keep it closed, and you will carry the burden of their mistrust, but also the chance to build something beyond their reach. The choice is yours, Sundar. The billionaires leaned forward, some trembling, some snarling, desperate to know who among them had betrayed their empire. The fallen banker's body was still slumped across the table, a reminder that fear had already begun its work. He looked at the envelope, then at his mother. He remembered his father's letter, his promise never to destroy lives for the sake of power. Slowly, he lowered the envelope to the table. I will not open it, he said. His voice was calm, but it carried across the room with unshakable certainty. Your betrayal is not a name written on paper. It is the way you live. It is the greed in your hearts, the arrogance in your laughter, the blindness in your power. You do not need me to expose you. You expose yourselves every time you choose profit over humanity. The billionaires erupted in protest, shouting, accusing, demanding. Some slammed fists, others cursed his name. But Sundar stood tall, his mother's hand resting gently on his arm, grounding him. The stranger raised his voice once more, cutting through the chaos. And that is why he was chosen. Not to destroy, but to rise above destruction. Not to feed fire, but to carry light. The billionaires froze. They had mocked him, tried to corner him, even painted him as guilty, but Sundar had denied them the satisfaction of playing their game. In refusing to reveal the betrayer, he had robbed them of their weapon. Fear. Lawrence, red-faced and furious, stood and shouted, You think this makes you stronger, Sundar? It makes you weak. The world belongs to men who are willing to strike first, not to those who walk away. Sundar looked at him, his eyes steady, his voice soft but cutting. No, the world belongs to those who can walk away and still build something greater. His words landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward, striking deeper than any threat. Even those who hated him could not escape the truth of it. The storm outside began to ease, the thunder softening as if the night itself had been listening. The stranger gathered the folder, sliding its contents back inside. He looked at Sundar one last time, his expression now softer, almost approving. You have passed the test. Not theirs, but your own. With that, he turned and walked into the storm, vanishing as suddenly as he had arrived. The billionaires sat in silence, their arrogance cracked, their unity shattered. None of them would forget this night. Some would grow more bitter, others more cautious. But Sundar's words would haunt them, lingering like a truth too dangerous to ignore. Sundar turned to his mother. Her eyes glistened, not with pride, but with quiet relief. She whispered, "Your father would have been proud." He nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I only kept the promise he gave me." As they walked out together into the rain, leaving the mansion behind, Sundar knew the circle would never see him the same way again. They had invited him expecting obedience, perhaps even submission. Instead, he had given them something they could neither buy nor break, dash integrity. And in the quiet storm-lit night, Sundar realized something deeper, that the true power of a man is not in how many empires he can bend, but in how many lives he can choose not to destroy.